One night in 1935, in a grand hotel in Pennsylvania, New York, suddenly thousands of people gathered. There were company presidents, bankers, lawyers, salesmen, dentists, accountants, architects, and even people who had traveled from India and Cuba. What were these thousands of people there for? 1935 was the time of the Great Depression in the United States. A large number of people were unemployed and couldn't even afford food. Yet, these thousands of people, even while hungry, spent money to buy tickets to attend a lecture by a man named Carnegie. What was this lecture about that made them come? Hello, welcome to the Daily Reading Club. Spend 10 minutes refreshing your thinking. Today, we are discussing the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. This book explains Carnegie's core ideas, allowing us to learn his training courses without having to travel all the way to the United States. Carnegie's lectures were sold out for many years. Why was he so popular? At that time, the University of Chicago spent 2 years researching this phenomenon and found that most people, after years of struggling in society, gradually realized that the knowledge they learned in school was not enough to achieve worldly success. This realization sparked the adult education movement, which swept across the United States and continues to this day. This pursuit of success in American society, and the importance placed on adult education, can be attributed to Dale Carnegie. Many famous figures in American politics and business, such as oil tycoon Rockefeller, hotel magnate Hilton, Chrysler founder Chrysler, and several U.S. presidents like Johnson and Kennedy, attended Carnegie's lectures. Warren Buffett, the famous investor, received his Carnegie course certificate in 1952. He said it was the most important degree he ever earned and even hung the certificate in the most prominent place in his office. Next, let's analyze the core content of Carnegie's famous work, How to Win Friends and Influence People. People find it difficult to self-reflect. Carnegie was very familiar with traditional Chinese culture, and he often liked to quote sayings like this in his speeches and books. Understanding worldly affairs is knowledge. Understanding human relationships is wisdom. Every industry has its own rules, and interpersonal relationships also have their rules. Carnegie said that the weaknesses of human nature are rooted in our genes. We should not fight against them but rather understand, accept, and use them. On May 7, 1931, a massive manhunt took place in New York, shocking the entire country. The media called it the capture of the two-gun Crowley, who was arrested after a fierce gunfight with the police. After his capture, Police Commissioner Mulrooney declared that the two-gun Crowley was one of the most dangerous criminals in New York's history. But how did Crowley see himself? In a letter to a friend, he wrote, "Beneath my exterior lies a weary heart, tired but kind, and I would never harm anyone." Even when Crowley was sentenced to death, and was being escorted to the execution site, he still defended himself, saying, "This is the result of my self-defense." Carnegie once discussed this issue with the prison warden, Lewis Laws, who said that very few criminals in prison admit that they are bad people. They share the same human nature as you and me, so they find excuses for themselves, explaining why they broke into a safe or pulled the trigger. They try to find a justifiable reason for their actions. Whether or not these reasons hold up, they firmly believe their actions were justified and that they should not be imprisoned. Think about it. If even the most lawless criminals in prison believe they did nothing wrong, how much more so do the people around us? In 99% of cases, no matter how serious the mistake, people do not blame themselves. So, it's difficult for people to self-reflect. We should not criticize others lightly. In interpersonal relationships, criticism is often useless. It only triggers resistance and makes people eager to defend themselves. Criticism is also dangerous. It can hurt self-esteem and even create resentment. The secret to persuading others is to find out what they want. When fishing, you need to put bait on the hook, like worms, that the fish like. Some might say this is common sense. Yes, even a child understands this. So why not try the same method when fishing for people? The only effective way to influence others is to find out what they want. Carnegie had two nephews in college who always used the excuse of being too busy with their studies to write home. Carnegie said he had a way to make them write back. He wrote them a letter and casually mentioned at the end that he had enclosed $5. However, he deliberately forgot to include the money when he sent the letter. The nephews quickly wrote back, respectfully thanking their dear uncle for the letter. A friend of mine used a similar method in educating his child. His child was about to start kindergarten, and generally, children cry and refuse to go at first. But my friend's child was excited to go to kindergarten, and was more enthusiastic than his parents. It turns out that since the child was over a year old, my friend would praise the child whenever he did something, saying, "You're doing great. A child as great as you will definitely go to kindergarten someday." So the child always thought going to kindergarten was a big deal, and was eagerly looking forward to it. When it was finally time to go, he was more enthusiastic than anyone else. As the child grew older and developed his own ideas, many parents tried all sorts of methods to educate him, scolding him. But does this approach work? Expecting the child's thoughts to align with the parents' is unrealistic. Instead, it's better to seriously think about what the child wants and how to give him what he wants while meeting the parents' expectations. The same applies to adults. When trying to persuade others, avoid rashly stating your own needs. Before you speak, consider what the other person wants and what would motivate them to take action. Behavior stems from people's needs, and the primary way to persuade others is to trigger their strong desires. Steel magnate Andrew Carnegie used the same psychological tactics. He also achieved great success in business. Once, when Carnegie was competing with George Pullman for the sleeping car business of the Pacific Railroad Company, the steel magnate used a clever tactic. At the time, Carnegie's Central Transportation Company and Pullman's company were both vying for the business, leading to a fierce price war, with both sides nearly competing at zero profit. Finally, Andrew Carnegie proposed the idea of jointly establishing a new company to Pullman. Pullman listened with interest, but was not fully convinced. In the end, Pullman asked, "If we merge, what should the new company be called?" Carnegie quickly replied, "No need to ask, of course, it should be called Pullman Luxury Car Company." Hearing this, a smile appeared on Pullman's face. This conversation changed the history of the American steel industry, and truly made Carnegie the steel magnate of America. For anyone, their own name is the most important word in the world. When interacting with people, talking about things they like is often effective. Our conversation partners don't really care about us or our problems, but are much more interested in their own desires and worries. A toothache is far more important to them than a war in a distant country. A small project they are busy with is far more troubling than a magnitude 10 earthquake in another state. The key to mastering interpersonal relationships is to praise more and criticize less. Completely rational people are rare. Most people are full of biases, and their perceptions are constrained by prejudice, suspicion, fear, jealousy, and arrogance. No one is willing to change their views easily, so don't be quick to find fault with others. The most important thing in a person's heart is not right or wrong, but their threatened self-esteem. People habitually stick to their preformed beliefs, and when questioned, they become resistant, searching for all sorts of reasons to protect the facts they believe in. If you want to prove something, do so subtly and without embarrassing the other person. For example, if someone says something wrong, even if you are certain they are wrong, you might try saying, "What you said is different from what I originally thought. I must be mistaken. Let's find out the facts together." People have a basic need to feel important. Everyone believes they are better than others in some way. The way to enter someone's heart is to quietly let them know they are indeed important and strong in some way. How do you do that? Praise them. There is a story in Aesop's fables about the north wind and the sun. The north wind and the sun argued about who was stronger, and they decided to see who could make a man take off his coat. The wind blew as hard as it could, but the harder it blew, the tighter the man wrapped his coat around him. Then the sun came out and shone warmly on the man. The man gradually felt hot, and took off his coat. So, when people feel warmth, they will open up their hearts. One of Carnegie's students, Mrs. Jacobs, once cleverly used this method. Her construction workers did good work, but after finishing each day, they always left the construction waste scattered everywhere and never cleaned up. One day after the workers had left, she cleaned up the site herself, neatly arranging all the scrap wood. The next morning, Mrs. Jacobs called the foreman aside and said, "I couldn't believe how clean you left the site last night. I was so touched. It looks so beautiful. The neighbors all say I have found a great group of workers." From that day on, the workers cleaned up all the leftover scraps and neatly placed them in the corner every day. The education expert Mr. Dao Xingji once served as the principal of Yucai School. One day, he saw a little boy hitting a classmate, so he immediately went over to stop the boy and told him to come to his office after school. After school, Mr. Dao returned to his office and saw the boy already waiting. He took out a piece of candy and said, "This is a reward for you because you arrived before me." As he spoke, Mr. Dao took out another piece of candy and said, "This is also a reward for you because when I asked you to stop hitting your classmate, you stopped immediately, which shows you respect me." The boy hesitantly accepted the candy. Mr. Dao then said, "I also found out that you hit your classmate because he was bullying a girl, which shows you have a sense of justice." Mr. Dao took out a third piece of candy and handed it to the boy. At this point, the boy began to cry and said, "Principal, I was wrong. No matter what, I shouldn't have hit my classmate." Mr. Dao then took out a fourth piece of candy and said, "You've admitted your mistake, so I'm rewarding you with another piece. Our conversation is now over." 4 pieces of candy, 4 compliments, and the boy sincerely admitted his mistake. Praise is important, which is why many people start expressing their opinions with praise, but then habitually use, but to introduce a contrast. For example, when parents want to correct their child's carelessness in studying, they might say something like, "Great job. We are really proud of your progress this term, but if you could work a little harder in math, your grades would be even better." This wording reduces the credibility of the whole sentence and does nothing to correct the child's attitude towards studying. If you replace "but" with "and," the problem will be solved. Good job. We are really proud of your progress this term, and if you continue to maintain this careful and serious attitude next term, your grades will definitely be even better than this term. This way, the child will accept the parent's praise, because there is no criticism following it. When negotiating with others, emphasize points of agreement and don't overly stress differences. From the beginning, try to get the other person to say yes and avoid giving them the opportunity to say no. No is the most difficult barrier to overcome in the world. Once someone says no, their self-esteem compels them to stick to their views. Skilled communicators always start by getting the other person to say yes repeatedly, thereby laying the psychological foundation and guiding the conversation toward a positive outcome. A friend of mine who works at a bank decided to try some of these techniques after reading this book. He tried to get customers to say yes. One day, an elderly customer came to the bank to conduct business, but he didn't have a mobile phone and didn't want to give the bank a contact number for any family members. How to persuade the elderly? He told the elderly man, "From your perspective, I understand that this information may seem unnecessary." The elderly man replied, "Exactly. I'm just here to deposit some money." After the elderly man said this, the teller continued, "But, sir, may I ask, in case of an emergency, would you want your bank savings to be transferred to your family? The elderly man replied, yes, of course. The teller then said, if you provide the contact information of your family to the bank, we can ensure that your savings are accurately transferred to them according to your wishes. This way, the money won't get lost, and everything will be handled properly. After answering yes 3 times, the elderly man eventually felt reassured and happily followed the teller's advice. Socrates, one of the wisest philosophers of all time, had a unique way of persuading people. His Socratic method was based on getting the other person to say yes. When Socrates communicated with others, he did so in such a clever way that the other person couldn't help but agree with him. He would then follow up with more questions, leading the other person to repeatedly say yes, eventually reaching a conclusion that was entirely different from what they initially believed. When someone feels noble, they are more willing to help you. About 300 years ago, the scientist Galileo said, you cannot teach a man anything, you can only help him find it within himself. We are more likely to trust conclusions we've reached on our own rather than ideas that others try to impose on us. If the answer to this is yes, then why try to force your views on others? It's wiser to gently guide others to come to the conclusion themselves. No one likes being forced to buy something or being coerced into completing a task. People prefer the feeling of making decisions on their own. Behind every action, people have 2 reasons, a noble excuse and a real motive. If you want to change someone, help them come up with a more noble reason. During World War I, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson decided to send a close confidant to Europe as a peace envoy to mediate between nations. Upon hearing this, U.S. Secretary of State William Bryan, a pacifist, was eager to serve his country and make his mark on history. However, President Wilson appointed another person, Colonel Edward House. Colonel House, not wanting to offend Bryan, had to muster the courage to personally convey the president's decision to him. Colonel House said that when Bryan heard that I was going to Europe as a peace envoy, disappointment was clearly written on his face. He said he had hoped to go himself. I told him that the president believed it was better to keep this matter low-key. If he sent you, everyone would speculate why the famous Secretary of State, Bryan, was in Europe, which would inevitably cause a great disturbance. The underlying message was clear, and Bryan was pleased, feeling quite gratified. Colonel House deeply understood human nature, and knew how to use people's weaknesses to his advantage. This method is not just the domain of high-ranking politicians, even a regular supermarket manager can use it. In his store, one employee kept misplacing price tags, causing customer dissatisfaction and complaints. Despite several reminders, the issue persisted. Finally, the manager came up with a solution. He called the employee into his office and appointed him as the store's price tag supervisor, responsible for ensuring that all price tags matched the products on the shelves. The new title and responsibilities completely changed the employee's attitude, and from then on, he diligently performed his duties. It may sound childish, but often people are just that, childish. Great leaders know how to use these weaknesses to manage people, and we can learn to try it too. Dale Carnegie led a successful life by adhering to these principles. Throughout history, the exploration of human nature has been an ongoing, extensive topic with countless discussions. In the midst of our mundane lives, we often fail to recognize our situation and the trajectory of our fate. Only by zooming in on the timeline can the outlines of destiny become clear. Dale Carnegie possessed this keen ability to perceive subtle signs and deduce their broader implications. He was sometimes rational and objective, deeply analyzing the motivations behind people's behavior, and at other times, warm and compassionate, reflecting on various experiences and stories that left a lasting impact on him. His examination of human nature was both intimate and detached. He was neither overly humble nor arrogant. Every word in his books is a reflection of his thoughts and experiences in interpersonal relationships. These experiences are not just unique to him, but resonate broadly with countless Americans. He distilled these life experiences into profound insights into human nature, explaining the art of living and dealing with others, whether it's NBA players emerging from rough neighborhoods, Silicon Valley elites who started from scratch in garages, or political leaders who changed the course of history. They all practice these simple truths. The core of the so-called American dream is to achieve a better life through personal effort, and Carnegie's life is a testament to these principles. In his book, Carnegie sincerely reflects, "Looking back on my own life, the past is vividly clear." Dale Carnegie's career was full of ups and downs, itself a remarkable story. Carnegie grew up on a farm in rural Missouri and didn't see a train until he was 12 years old. Yet, by the age of 46, he had traveled to most corners of the world, leaving his mark from Hong Kong in Asia to Hammerfest in Northern Europe. This boy, who once picked strawberries in Missouri to supplement his family's income, earning only 5 cents an hour, grew up to become the highest-paid trainer. The young farm boy who herded cattle in the countryside later flew around the world, becoming friends and mentors to royalty, presidents, and business leaders. Carnegie's early years were marked by hardship, with frequent misfortunes striking his family's small farm. Floods were a yearly occurrence, the piglets his family raised succumbed to cholera, and the bank threatened to foreclose on their mortgage. ChatGPT. After experiencing despair time and again, Carnegie's parents sold all their possessions and moved the family to Warrensburg, Missouri. Young Carnegie attended school in town, where boarding cost only $1 per day, but even this small amount was beyond his family's means. As a result, he had to walk at least 5 kilometers every day to and from school. Out of 600 students, only 6 couldn't afford to live in town, and Carnegie was one of them. He felt deeply ashamed of such poverty. As his sense of inferiority grew, he became eager to find a way to gain prestige at school. He quickly realized that certain groups at school were quite prestigious, such as the members of the football and basketball teams, as well as those who won in debate and public speaking competitions. Knowing he didn't have athletic talent, Carnegie decided to win a public speaking contest. He spent several months preparing, practicing his speeches whenever he could. Despite his thorough preparation, he encountered failure after failure, becoming so discouraged that he even contemplated suicide. However, he persevered. Then, one day, he won, not just one competition, but every competition. After graduating from college, Carnegie became a salesman for correspondence courses. However, no matter how passionately he promoted the courses, he couldn't meet his sales targets. He decided to move to Omaha to find a new job. Upon arriving in the southern part of Omaha, he found work as a salesman for a company selling bacon soap and lard. Carnegie studied various books, rode a spirited horse to visit Native Americans and play cards with them, and explored ways to collect debts. If a grocer ordered bacon and ham but couldn't pay, Carnegie would take a dozen shoes from the shelves in exchange. He would then sell the shoes to railroad workers and return the proceeds to the company. In just 2 years, he revitalized a low-performing sales area, raising it from 4th to 1st place. The company wanted to give him a raise and promotion, but Carnegie refused and resigned, moving to New York, where he planned to make a living by teaching. What would he teach? Reflecting on his college years, he realized that his confidence, courage, composure, and business communication skills all stemmed from his early training in public speaking. No college course had been as effective as this training. So, he asked a New York YMCA school to give him a chance to offer a public speaking course for business people. The YMCA agreed, but they were skeptical, because they had previously offered similar courses without success. They refused to pay Carnegie the $2 per night salary he requested, so Carnegie proposed a commission-based arrangement, where he would be paid a share of the profits. Over the next 3 years, the YMCA ended up paying Carnegie an amount equivalent to $30 per night. The course quickly grew in popularity, spreading by word of mouth among YMCA members and soon gaining fame in other cities. Carnegie began touring cities, giving lectures, and eventually traveled to London and Paris. Many business people sought him out, finding existing materials too academic and lacking practical value. Initially, Carnegie had intended to offer just a public speaking course, but to his surprise, his students were all business professionals who hadn't set foot in a classroom for nearly 30 years. They wanted immediate, tangible results that they could apply the next day in business meetings and public speaking. As a result, Carnegie's course had to be fast-paced and practical. He developed a unique training system that integrated public speaking, sales techniques, interpersonal relationships, and applied psychology, with astonishing results. In 1929, when the U.S. economy collapsed into the Great Depression, the real estate bubble triggered a chain reaction that devastated both the financial sector and the real economy. Public confidence in life hit rock bottom. In 1937, Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, was published, and over the next 80 years, it remained a timeless bestseller, inspiring countless readers. Dale Carnegie thus initiated one of the most profound transformations in adult education in American society, with an influence that continues to this day. Although Dale Carnegie consistently encouraged people to pursue success, he left a crucial reminder at the end of his book. He said that when it comes to personal happiness and success, family is far more important than a career, even a matter of life and death. He dedicated an entire chapter to teaching readers the 7 rules for a happy marriage and family life. Don't nag. Don't try to change your partner. Don't criticize each other. Sincerely appreciate your partner. For women, details matter. It's the little things that show true affection. Don't forget to be polite and respectful to your partner. Sexual intimacy is important. Don't neglect it. Dale Carnegie passed away in 1955. In a conversation before his death, he said, "I never expected that I would change the lives of millions." Well, that concludes the discussion of how to win friends and influence people. After listening to this book, what are your thoughts or takeaways? Feel free to share them in the comments. If you enjoyed today's content, don't forget to share it with your family or friends. See you next time.